Believers themselves are oftentimes much unacquainted with it, either as to their apprehension of its true nature, causes and effects, or at least as to their own interest and concern in it. As we don't know of ourselves the things that are worked in us of the Spirit of God, so we seldom attend as we ought to his instructing of us in them. It may seem strange indeed that whereas all believers are sanctified and made holy, they should not understand or apprehend what is worked in them or for them, and what abides with them. But alas, how little do we know of ourselves, of what we are, and whence are our powers and faculties, even in things natural. By diligent consideration of these things we may obtain a firm foundation to stand on, and a holy admiration of the infinite wisdom and goodness of that sovereign architect, who has raised this fabric to his own glory. And what we further attempt is vanity and curiosity. How little do we know of these souls of ours, and all that we do so is by their powers and operations, which are consequential to their being. Now these things are our own naturally. They dwell and abide with us. They are we, and we are they, and nothing else. Yet it is no easy thing for us to have a reflex and intimate acquaintance with them. And is it strange if we should be much in the dark to this new nature, this new creature which comes from above, from God in heaven, in which our natural reason has no acquaintance? It is new, it is wonderful, it is a work supernatural, and is known only by supernatural revelation. We must also consider that holiness is not confined to this life, but passes over into eternity and glory. Death has no power over it to destroy it or divest us of it. For its acts indeed are transient, but its fruits abide forever in their reward. They who die in the Lord rest from their labors, and their works do follow them. Revelation 14:13. God is not unrighteous to forget their labor of love. Hebrews 6:10. There is not any effect or fruit of holiness, not the least, not the giving of a cup of cold water to a disciple of Christ in the name of a disciple, but it shall be had in everlasting remembrance, and abide forever in its eternal reward. Nothing shall be lost, but all the fragments of it shall be gathered up and kept safe forever. Everything else, how specious soever it be in this world, shall be burnt up and consumed, as hay and stubble, when the least, the meanest, the most secret fruit of holiness shall be gathered as gold and silver, durable substance into God's treasury, and become a part of the riches of the inheritance of the saints in glory. Let no soul fear the loss of any labor, in any of the duties of holiness, in a most secret contest against sin, for inward purity, for outward fruitfulness, in a mortification of sin, resistance of temptations, improvement of grace, and patience, moderation, self-denial, contentment. And all that you do know and what you do not know shall be revived, called over, and abide eternally in your reward. Our Father who now sees in secret will one day reward openly, and the more we abound in these things, the more will God be glorified in the recompense of reward. But this is not all, nor that which I intend. Secondly, it abides forever and passes over into glory in its principle or nature. The love in which we now adhere to God, and by which we act the obedience of faith towards the saints, does not fail. It doesn't end when glory comes on, but is a part of it. 1 Corinthians 13:8. It is true, some gifts shall be done away, as useless in a state of perfection and glory, as the apostle there discourses, and some graces shall cease, as to some special acts and peculiar exercise, as faith and hope, so far as they respect things unseen and future. But all those graces in which holiness is constituted, and wherein it consists, for the substance of them, as they contain the image of God, as by them we are united and adhere to God in Christ, shall in their present nature, improved to perfection, abide forever. In our knowledge of them, therefore, have we our principal insight into our eternal condition and glory, and this is, as a firm foundation of consolation, so a part of our chiefest joy in this world. Is it not a matter of unspeakable joy and refreshment that these poor bodies we carry about us, after they have been made a prey to death, dust, worms, and corruption, shall be raised and restored to life and immortality, freed from pain, sickness, weakness, weariness, invested with those qualities in conformity to Christ's glorious body, which yet we don't understand. It is so also that these souls which now animate and rule in us shall be delivered from all their darkness, ignorance, vanity, instability, and alienation from things spiritual and heavenly. But this is not all. These poor low graces which now live and are acting in us shall be continued, preserved, purified, and perfected, but in their nature be the same as now they are, as our souls and bodies shall be. That love in which we now adhere to God as our chiefest good, that faith in which we are united to Christ, our everlasting head, that delight in any of the ways or ordinances of God in which he is enjoyed, according as he has promised his presence in them, that love and goodwill which we have for all those in whom is the Spirit, and on whom is the image of Christ, with the entire principle of spiritual life and holiness, which is now begun in any of us, shall be all purified, enhanced, perfected, and passed into glory. That very holiness which we here attain, those inclinations and dispositions, those frames of mind, those powers and abilities and obedience and adherence to God, which here contend with the weight of their own weakness and imperfection, and with the opposition that is continually made against them by the body of death, that is utterly to be abolished, shall be gloriously perfected into immutable habits, unchangeably acting our souls in the enjoyment of God. And this also manifests how much concern it is to us to be acquainted with the doctrine of it, and how much more to be really interested in it. Holiness is that which God indispensably requires of us. The full prosecution of this consideration we must put off to our arguments for the necessity of it, which will ensue in their proper place. At present I shall show that not only God requires holiness indispensably in all believers, but also that this is all which he requires of them or expects from them, for it comprises the whole duty of man. And this surely renders it needful for us both to know what it is and diligently to apply ourselves to the obtaining and assured participation of it. For what servant who has any sense of his relation and duty, if he be satisfied that his master requires but one thing of him, will not endeavor an acquaintance with it, and a performance of it? Some indeed say that their holiness, such as it is the chief or only design of the gospel, if they intend that it is the first principal design of God in and by the gospel, and that not only as to the preceptive part of it, but also as to its doctrinal and promissory parts, whence it is principally and emphatically denominated, it is a fond imagination. God's great and first design in and by the gospel is eternally to glorify himself, his wisdom, goodness, love, grace, righteousness, and holiness by Jesus Christ. And in order to this, his great and supreme end, he has designed the gospel and designs by the gospel to reveal that love and grace of his to lost sinners, with the way of its communication through the mediation of his Son incarnate, is the only means in which he will be glorified and in which they may be saved. Acts 26:18. To prevail with men in and by the dispensation of its truth and encouragement of its promises, to renounce their sins and all other expectations of relief or satisfaction, and to betake themselves by faith to that way of life and salvation which is therein declared to them, to be the means and instrument of conveying over to them and giving them a title to and a right in that grace and mercy, that life and righteousness which is revealed and tendered to them thereby, to be the way and means of communicating the Spirit of Christ with grace and strength to the elect, enabling them to believe and receive the atonement, by this to give them union with Christ as their spiritual and mystical head, is also to fix their hearts and souls in their choicest actings, in their faith, trust, confidence, and love, immediately on the Son of God, as incarnate and their mediator. John 14, verse 1.